Welcome back to Stories Worth Hearing. I'm John Quick, your host, and today I get to share a conversation with someone who has built a fascinating career in both business and entertainment, Armen Martin. Armen is the founding partner and CEO of Foundation Law Group, a modern law firm that helps startups, investors, and creative leaders tackle big opportunities. Over the years, he's guided companies through major mergers and acquisitions, raised over $1 billion in venture funding, and worked with some of the biggest names in tech and media. He's also stepped into the entertainment world, serving as a legal advisor on HBO's hit show Silicon Valley, making sure the startup world on screen matched the real one. In our conversation, we'll dive into his story, from where he grew up to what drew him into law, to why he started his own firm, and the unique perspective he brings from working in both boardrooms and Hollywood. So, Armen, welcome to the show. My first question is, how did you get started in law?
So that after college, I did a year working in Sacramento in the state capitol and realized that politics as a career was not for me. So I kind of didn't know what to do next. I talked to my college mentor, who was also my political mentor, and he said, look, maybe one day you'll run for public office. Why don't you go to law school? It's a very flexible degree. You could do anything you want after law school. You don't have to be a lawyer. So based on his advice, I applied and went to law school. And it is absolutely advice that I would not give to anybody going forward. It's like telling somebody to go to trucking school without wanting to be a trucker.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a lot of folks who do go to law school and end up in careers outside of law. But the difficulty is that these days, with the cost of law school, when I went to law school, UCLA was extraordinarily cheap as a public university. So I didn't come out with a huge amount of loans, but I still came out with some loans. And today it's actually, it costs about the same to go to UCLA as it does to USC Law School, for example. It's gotten a lot more expensive. But you need a job in order to pay those loans back. And it's very difficult to say no to the people who are on campus offering these high-paying jobs to become a lawyer. So that's how I became a lawyer.
Nice. Did you have somebody early on that you kind of looked up to, was a hero to you in your life? And tell me a little bit about that.
I mean, ironically, my heroes growing up were either in sports, as a big Dodgers fan, or, and I recently met Oral Hershiser and we talked law, which was kind of cool.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Or politics. I still am enamored of, and Ronald Reagan still is my hero. I didn't really have any heroes in law per se. Since becoming a lawyer, there are definitely a number of lawyers who I've met over the course of my career who have had a profound influence on me, including the mentors that I had when I was practicing in the Bay Area, a guy named Hank Massey. And then when I came down and was practicing here in Los Angeles, a guy named Jeff Weiner. They were definitely people who I looked up to because they were excellent technical lawyers. They are. I shouldn't put them in the past tense. And as well as being just wonderful people. And they really taught me that in order to be a successful lawyer, you don't need to be the jerk, the a-hole, the screamer, none of that. You could be a very friendly, get along person and still do a great job for your client. And that's how I've tried to conduct myself in my career.
That's awesome. So you've worked at some pretty great firms before starting your own. What were some of the things that you learned in some of those firms before you decided to start your own?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think I learned the importance of building a team and having personal connections with the people that you work with. It's ironic because we're now virtual, and we could talk about how that plays out in a virtual environment later in the podcast. But I think that that's really important in an area of law where there's a lot of stress. Clients need everything yesterday. You're expected, you make a lot of money, and as a result, you're expected to be available. So having good relationships with the people that you work with really makes it a lot easier. That's the one really big takeaway I took from the various places I was at before starting this firm.
That's great. At one point, you're probably on the edge of, okay, should I keep working for big firms or should I start my own firm? Talk to me a little bit about that story in your life and what pushed you to then go start your own.
Yeah, I mean, look, I didn't think it was possible to do the kind of work that I do at a small firm, like my own firm. And my practice these days consists of representing startup companies, which a lot of times means dealing with venture capitalists, and it's not just folks at the garage. You're dealing with high-powered law firms on the other side, and venture capitalists who want to make sure that the company lawyer that represents the company they're investing in knows what the heck he's doing, and mergers and acquisitions. And in particular, and I thought, look, you need a lot of support from specialists, and whether that's an employment lawyer or a real estate, environmental lawyer, a tax lawyer. And I thought that was going to be very difficult to do on a smaller scale. So that was really what was keeping me from starting my own firm earlier than I did. And what I discovered was that that's not actually the case, that there are lots of resources out there that will allow somebody that starts their own firm and knows what they're doing to complete transactions without a huge team.
And my guess is by doing that, there's some cost savings there.
Definitely.
Yeah.
The clients always ask for one thing when trying to figure out costs, and that's what's your hourly rate. And look, obviously that's very important because that times the number of hours, right, leads to what's on the bill. What they don't ask is how many people are going to be working on this transaction. And frankly, that's how the larger firms really stack up the bill. You have 3 or 4 different corporate lawyers working on a transaction. The hourly rate's no longer like $1,200 an hour. It's now like $4,000 an
Yeah.
hour. So that's really, it's actually, there are actually 3 inputs in figuring out what the total cost will be. And look, the reality is if you're working on $1 billion deal, you probably need 3 or 4 corporate lawyers to work on the same transaction. But, I was talking to a law student yesterday who wants to become an M&A lawyer and telling him about my practice. And what I noted for him was that sometimes people would be surprised because I'd be doing a deal against a large law firm on the other side. And, in the morning, I'd have a call with the junior associate to talk about the due diligence. And then an hour later, I'd have a call with the senior associate or junior partner to talk about the documents. And then an hour after that, I'd have a call with the senior partner to talk about the structure of the deal. And they were very surprised it was one guy doing kind of all of this. And it was a little different for me as well when I started. But what I've discovered is for the right size of deal, and that's pretty much anything up to $100 million, you don't need to have a huge team of folks working on things. As long as you have a competent M&A lawyer leading the charge, then, you can round out the practice with the specialists who come in to talk about IP or employment matters, whatever it may be, in order to complete a transaction.
So one of the things I think is really cool, you have a law firm now, Foundation Law Group, where you're the partner and CEO, and it's virtual. So you decide to start your own law firm. The distinction that you guys have is that it can be a 100% virtual. Tell me about what made you create that specific distinction.
Okay. So that specific distinction was very simple. When we started the firm, it was me and my original partner, Terry Kwan. Both Terry and I like working from home. So when we started the firm, we're like, yeah, we don't really need to have fancy office space. And in particular, as a corporate attorney that does startups and M&A, I found that maybe 2 or 3 times a year did I have a client coming to my fancy office in Century City, right, or downtown. Most of the time when I went with clients, it was over a meal, which frankly I find to be the best way to interact with clients, because then you're not just their lawyer, you also become a friend. And it's harder to fire your friend for somebody cheaper or for some other dazzling thing later. So I always encourage young lawyers, take your clients out for lunch, dinner, and befriend them. But that also means you don't have to work with jerks, but that's a different thing. So that's why we decided to employ the virtual format. As it was, even when I had the fancy office space, I would say I probably had never met 50% of my clients in person. Whether it was geographic, we have clients around the country and around the world, but sometimes, I have clients right down the street that I've never met. I sold a company. Some of it was during COVID, so that was in play as well. But I sold a company for a guy who lives and works 20 minutes away, and I didn't meet him in person until after the deal was done.
That's cool.
And that's saying something when somebody says, here's my $25 million biggest asset that I have, please sell it for me. And I'm okay not meeting you face to face in order to trust that you're going to do a good job for me.
So what's it been like marketing your firm? I think if you work for a bigger firm, some of that's kind of taken care of for the folks that work there. When you're the person in charge, the CEO, the person who's the founder, that all falls on you. How's that been?
Look, the reality is that in corporate law in particular, the vast majority of your marketing is done in person and is based on relationships. So you get clients from your current clients who then refer you to their friends, from other professionals, whether it's investment bankers, venture capitalists, accountants, who know you to be a good attorney and can refer you to their clients. Or, as I've discovered in this format, and it's something frankly I did not expect, how much business I would get from the large firms I used to be at and my contacts at large firms because they're just too expensive, or because they have a conflict and they'd rather send it to me knowing that I'm going to hand it back to them after the deal is done rather than sending it to a competitor, a direct competitor.
Yeah. So what's some advice you'd give to folks that are coming out of law school? You mentioned you talk to somebody, I'm sure you do often. People probably want to pick your brain. What's some advice you'd give? It's, as you mentioned, law school is very expensive now. It might be a different world than it was when you entered the job market. There's going to be folks listening in thinking, man, I want to become a lawyer. What are a couple things you'd usually say to folks that come your way with those kinds of questions?
Okay, so I'm going to take one step back from that and talk about people thinking about going to law school and applying to law school, because I talked about this with the young man that I was meeting with yesterday, and I gave him the bad news that it's great that you're going to UCLA, my alma mater, but you probably should have picked a much higher ranked school that was outside Los Angeles. And that's the first piece of advice I give people: go to the highest ranked school you get into. Why? Because the folks at, let's say, the top 2 or 3 law schools, Harvard, Yale, Chicago, whatever the rankings are today, they get their pick of law firms and their pick of jobs when they come out. And then you go one rank down, let's say 4 through 6 or 7, and like 90% of those folks get their pick. And then when you get to the 15s or 16s where UCLA is, depending on the economy, now it's only 40 to 60%. And if you go down to where I'm an adjunct professor and I think is a great school, Loyola, here in Los Angeles, it's maybe the top 5 or 10% of the class that gets those jobs. So unfortunately, lawyers are very hierarchical, and the rank of your law school means a lot. Now, when you're coming out, the advice I give people is try to go. Everybody wants the big firm job where they're going to be getting paid $160,000, $170,000 straight out of law school. The percentage of folks who go to law school and get those jobs is probably 10%. Okay. At most. I don't know what the exact numbers are, but it's somewhere like that. The vast majority of folks are not going to get jobs making that much money coming out of law school. So the advice I have for them is take relevant classes to what you're interested in doing while you're in law school. So at least you can show some sort of experience, even if it's not at a firm. If you want to be an M&A lawyer, you took the M&A classes, you took the tax classes, right? And then if you can't find a job at a big firm, try to find a job. It's always easier to get a job when you have a job. And if I'm at a big firm and I'm interviewing people to come work for me fresh out of law school, I'd rather hire somebody who's been working for a year in an area not related to my own than somebody who has been sitting on a couch, right, and has no work experience.
So there's also going to be folks listening in that are like, a lot of entrepreneurs listen to the show. And I think oftentimes, people call a lawyer after the crap hits the fan, or maybe it's a little too late. What is kind of the best runway to get a relationship with a lawyer for somebody that has a startup or an entrepreneur kind of mindset? Where does that become most helpful to have somebody you could pick up the phone to and kind of powwow about legal advice to, in your opinion?
So my advice to entrepreneurs is talk to your friends who are entrepreneurs and ask them about their lawyer and whether they like their lawyer, and talk to that lawyer as soon as possible. Okay, there are now a bunch of services that will incorporate a company and do the very basics through sort of a question and answer online type thing, Atlas, Stripe, and a couple of others. And they do a decent job. But a lot of times in startup law in particular, people think it's very cookie cutter. And in some ways it is, because the forms that we use are very cookie cutter. A safe, which a lot of folks use to raise money on early on, is cookie cutter. You just change a couple things and you're ready to go. What kind of instrument to use, how to structure at the very beginning. It's actually in some ways a lot more art than it is science. Because when I talk to my clients at the very beginning, I ask them some basic questions. What do your investors look like? Are they just going to sign anything you put in front of them and send you a check? I might think about things a little differently. Are they going to ask a lot of questions? Are they more sophisticated angel investors? Okay, maybe we should be doing a price round rather than a safe, because angel investors like the benefits of qualified small business stock. So there are a lot of things that at the very beginning, if you get them right, you'll save money in the long run. And frankly, most good startup lawyers will at least have an initial conversation with you without charging you for it. So why not get on the horn, get their ideas, interview them, make sure you like working with them and you like their personality before you sign them up, and make sure that whoever you talk to is actually going to be the person that's doing the work for you when you hire them. And it's not just going to hand you down to an associate to do the grinding.
Have you seen the ways in which entrepreneurs raise their money change since you've started, day one in law practice to now? It seems like there's a lot more crowdfunding kind of stuff going on. And what's your take on all that?
Yeah. Look, definitely. When I started in Silicon Valley in 1998, I started at a time when everything was super hot. And back then, it was two guys and a dog in a garage, and they'd have a term sheet for $4 million from a venture capitalist. Okay. That's changed. Venture capitalists no longer will just write term sheets based on business ideas, unless you're, somebody who's exited multiple companies with significant amount of return and have a track record. Okay. If you're just starting a new business, you're almost certainly not going to get money from a venture capitalist. So who do you get money from? Initially, most people raise their money from friends and family. And that's, anywhere from 200 to 500, maybe $1 million. If you don't have that network, then you're going out and trying to raise money from angel investors. I myself am an angel investor, and I'm part of the Pasadena Angels. Find out who the angel investing groups are around town and apply to them. Most of them you can apply to online. So that's been the biggest change. And then once companies have some traction and whatnot, now you see venture capitalists coming into play and doing a Series A round or a Series B round. That's been a significant change. The other sort of big change is that back in the day, we did the first round of financing almost always was a price round. It used to be a Series A financing. That, and then it was Series B, Series C, D, going on, right? Now we have this new nomenclature, and now it's Series Seed before the Series A, and sometimes Series Pre-Seed, and blah, blah, blah. And people focus a lot of time on the importance of this label. And what I tell them is the label doesn't really mean much. It's more marketing rather than anything else.
So one of the things I read, I think, is that you were a legal advisor on the TV show Silicon Valley. How did that come about?
So one of my really good friends, a guy named Dave Young, who is probably the best known startup lawyer and probably the best startup lawyer in Los Angeles, at a big firm here, was their original legal counsel and gave them sort of insight on how things actually happen in Silicon Valley, even though he's down here and so am I. But then again, that's where Hollywood is. And he had a conflict, so he called me to pinch hit, and I established a relationship with them. And it was very cool. I mean, they basically would ask, "Hey, we're thinking about writing the story this way. What do you think? Does it work legally?" And sometimes you'd have to give them the bad news that no, it doesn't. Things don't actually happen that way. And though while a lot of Silicon Valley, and I watched the show religiously, was over the top, much of it, I would say 90% of it, particularly related to the legal aspects, were spot on, because they got advice from experts.
So let's say somebody they've listened to this and they're like, man, I got to call Armen. I got a startup, blah, blah, blah. What's an onboarding process look like for somebody that wants to get your law firm involved, whether it's, a small or a big thing?
Yeah. So, you have an idea. You would call me. I would send you what I call an incorporation questionnaire that you fill out. Gives me sort of the information that I need. I help you fill that out. And then it's a very simple process. We incorporate the company, issue the shares to the founders. We set up a stock plan so that you now can issue shares to employees, consultant advisors going forward. And then we help you with your initial round of financing. And we do that all for a fixed fee. And a lot of firms will do that, including the big firms. The big firms generally don't work on a fixed fee. What they'll do is they'll defer, let's say, the first $30,000 in costs. Having spoken to some of them, I know that our fixed fee is about a third of what what their deferral is. But that's how we work with them. And what I tell them is by the end of that initial process should be funded to hit the ground running and to build their business. And hopefully they won't be reaching back out to me very often until they're ready to raise their next more significant round of financing. I'm very aware that legal is the last thing people want to spend on when they're building a company. But a few dollars spent smartly at the very beginning can save you huge headaches and a lot of money in the future when, I have to come in and clean up things that were not done correctly. I tell engineers this all the time, just like I wouldn't endeavor to try to build a semiconductor or even a website. They shouldn't be trying to be a lawyer. Stick to your lane, do what you're best at doing. I will tell you what you can do on your own safely without paying me. I'm very happy to do that. But there are some things you absolutely need to have a lawyer involved with. And the best clients are those that understand that distinction. What sort of not important, can handle yourself, what I need to call Armen about and talk about.
You mentioned politics and being in California, liking Ronald Reagan. Are you hopeful for California's future, the economy there? What's it like living there and the economy? And we see, people see it on the news and it's like gloom and doom, but what's it actually like there? Are you hopeful for the future?
Well, look, politically, I'm not aligned with California, but I've lived in California my whole life. I've lived in Los Angeles basically my whole life, and I don't plan on leaving. That having been said, unfortunately, given some of the challenges that businesses here in California face, I can't tell you how many times I've had clients move out of the state or are thinking about moving out. And it's disheartening. I think we've gotten away from sort of being the land of innovation. Definitely in terms of things like taxation and regulation. And you're seeing the effects. There's no question about it. That having been said, it's up to the individual. Look, I can afford living here, but I continue to do that because I do love the state. I do love a lot of the people here, but it's not as easy for people who are more middle class. Those taxes really hit home and hit hard. And that's just the reality of living in California. Yeah.
So recently I've had a couple conversations with some friends, and it's funny how they've kind of went both the same way. My advice to them was the entrepreneur friends. And what I said to them was, man, you need to hire a lawyer. And what they told me was, man, don't worry about it. I asked ChatGPT and he said I didn't need to hire a lawyer. What are your thoughts on that? I'm sure you get a lot of that, maybe from clients or just friends or whatever. ChatGPT being somebody's lawyer is probably not the best idea, but I would love to hear your thoughts.
Look, it's not the best idea. Let me give you a bang on example. We actually use AI in our practice. In the last 6 months, we deployed it, and it's incredibly helpful. The problem is that if you're not a lawyer, you're gonna get messed up because you don't know the right questions to ask and the right prompts to give. People will go to ChatGPT and say, hey, ChatGPT, give me a non-disclosure agreement, right? And ChatGPT will spit out something that's okay, I suppose, but it's not tailored for your situation. Maybe you're the one sharing all the information, and ChatGPT gives you a mutual non-disclosure agreement where now you owe obligations to the other side, even though you're not getting anything from that, right? You can get sued based on that. right? So that's a real problem. For example, the AI that we use is specifically tailored for law firms and is much, much better than ChatGPT. But when I have it review, and it does things that are fantastic. I can have it review an agreement and it will give me suggestions on, hey, did you think about this? Did you think about this? But I still find that 50% of the suggestions it gives me, it either don't make sense because of the context of the deal and the personalities involved, right? You can't just mark every document to hell. You have to understand what the dynamics are of the transaction. Or sometimes it's just the wrong comment. If I was on the other side, I might want that comment, but I certainly don't want to make that change for my client's position. And it takes a lawyer to understand that. So I think AI has come a long way. I think AI absolutely is the future. It's going to be part of the law practice. And I think you'll be committing malpractice not using AI, but you still need a lawyer who understands the dynamics of a transaction in order to implement it correctly.
So you talked a little bit about what you do specifically for your law firm, but does the law firm overall do other things? And if so, what are those other things?
Yeah. So my practice is general corporate representation focusing on startups and mergers and acquisitions. Our law firm as a whole has about 7 lawyers that do that. But then we also do intellectual property, patents and trademarks. We do real estate, tax, litigation, employment litigation, as well as commercial litigation. And basically whatever a startup business will need in order to go forward on a day-to-day basis. There's certain things that we farm out to experts. Like there's a small privacy law firm that focuses on privacy issues and they work on our privacy matters. So we really pride ourselves on having experts work on everything. We don't try to be generalists. While we're significantly less expensive than our peers at the big firms, it's still expensive. And you need to be an expert of whatever you work on. You can't learn on a client's dime. So I think we've assembled a great team of folks. And, we also do a few things that are very niche. We just hired an amazing woman that works on ERISA litigation, very dry, very niche, but very important. We also hired my former roommate from law school, who is a white collar criminal defense lawyer. Hope you never have to work with him. But he's one of the best as a former U.S. attorney. He's represented some really high profile figures in white collar defense matters.
And then do you guys only work in California, or if somebody's listening from Washington or Oregon or wherever, can they give you all a call?
Yeah, absolutely. No, we don't just work in California. I have clients literally around the country. A lot of times, most startups, for example, will be incorporated in Delaware. And I know that there's a bunch of stuff floating around there about how Delaware is not safe anymore. And, you should incorporate in Nevada or Texas or somewhere else. And to that, I say, not so fast. Delaware is still considered the creme de la creme. And as a result, even if you're in Oregon or Washington, wherever you may be, you're almost certainly going to be registered as a Delaware corporation if you want to raise venture capital money. And then we'll get you qualified to do business in whatever state you're in as well.
So we'll put all your information in the description, but for folks listening in, what's the best way to get a hold of you or your law firm?
Email.
Nice.
Email is the best way. Email me, armen@foundationlaw.com. I'm faster at replying to emails than I am texts. I tell people that all the time because I'm in front of my computer. It seems like 24/7. And then we can set up a time to talk. A lot of folks are old school. They'll call you. If I don't recognize your number, I'm not going to pick up. I'm too busy.
Well,
So email me.
Folks listening in, I want to encourage, if you're an entrepreneur or startup, or maybe you're up and raring and you're 10 years into your business and you got legal questions, I always encourage folks to get in touch with a lawyer. We'll put your information in the description, Armen. But do you have any last minute thoughts here before we head off here? 30 minutes has gone by in a flash.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, the future of legal work is changing. There are now a number of firms like ours that are totally virtual, and sometimes we're the right choice, sometimes we're not. If Bank of America knocks on my door tomorrow and says, hey, I want to do a bunch of deals, I'm probably not the right choice. Why? Because if something goes wrong, they're going to say, wait, who are these people? Why don't you hire the really expensive fancy lawyers? But if you're an entrepreneur who's looking to start a business or looking to sell your business, then we're absolutely the right choice. And, ask if we're not the right choice. I will definitely tell you, and we will tell you, and a good lawyer will tell you. Okay, most lawyers that I deal with, despite our reputation, are honest people. They're not looking to grab that last dollar. If they are, they're not busy enough because they're not good. If they are busy, they're going to tell you what's they're good for and what you should go find somebody else to do because they're not the appropriate resource.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, Armen. Folks listening in, I'll put all the information in the description, website, email, all that kind of stuff, so you can go check them out. We wish you nothing but success, Armen. Welcome back anytime, and hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. It was a pleasure.